Now, I get lots of lovely emails and DMs on my X account from people all the time. Sometimes they've got suggestions for videos. Sometimes they want to call me a stupid cow, that type of thing. And recently, in amongst all of these messages, I've been getting lots of bits of the Magna Carta. And I love a good conspiracy theory, but there's nothing better than the thought that a medieval document can save us all from a tyrannical government. I thought we'd look through it and see if it can. Is the Magna Carta a silver bullet to stop modern tyranny? Most of you might remember this, right, from school. It was signed in 1215, but not by some freedom-loving ordinary citizens. No, it was a bunch of really pissed off barons, sick to death of King John stealing all their money. Okay, I like it so far. The barons were the power class. They owned the land, they controlled the wealth, they raised armies, they effectively bankrolled the crown. King John couldn't govern without them or their money. Right, still sounds like today. Magna Carta was devised by these barons as an agreement, mostly saying, you can't just tax us into oblivion and seize our estates. We're the ones who keep you in power. We still have barons like this today, by the way, but they're not hereditary like they were then. It's more like the elite money men and the corporate power brokers that governments now bend the knee to. Essentially, the Magna Carta was a peace treaty between the king and his nobles. It all happened in a place called Runnymede in Surrey in June 1215, where King John rode, surrounded by knights, across a field to face very heavily armed rebel barons. It was more like a hostage negotiation at sword point than an actual agreed agreement. The barons made John seal the charter, not because they loved liberty or they were fighting some moral crusade, but they were just pissed off that they were being taxed. Most of the Magna Carta's contents were actually just admin, like rules on fishing, inheritance, weights and measures, the stuff that our civil service still gets utterly bogged down on today. And don't even start me on the EU and regulations. Anyway, a few lines of the Magna Carta became legendary, like Clause 39. No free man shall be seized or imprisoned except by the law of the land. Sounds perfectly reasonable. And then Clause 40. To no one will we deny or delay justice. Again, perfectly reasonable. But John tore it up within months. And then the Pope declared the entire Magna Carta illegal and England went straight into civil war. Handily, a year later, John died, leaving his 9-year-old son Henry III on the throne. England was still in chaos. The French wanted to put their own prince on the throne. And so the king's guardians pulled a kind of early PR stunt. They reissued the Magna Carta in 1216, but they cut out all the good bits, all the dangerous rebel clauses, like Clause 61, which we'll come back to later. But this was the security clause, which set up a council of barons with the legal right to rebel if the king broke the charter. In theory, it meant John had to agree to let his nobles seize his castles, his land, all his money and his jewels if he misbehaved. Obviously, that clause was taken out. You can't run a kingdom where rebellion is written into the law. What government would allow that? Anyway, it was the very first clause to be scrapped, and it never returned in any later version. The reissued version worked, though, and for the next few decades, really, the charter kept being reissued until Edward I put it into statute law in 1297. And that's how a failed peace treaty became rebranded as the ancient Charter of English Liberty. Later, though, all kings reissued and watered down their own versions. through the centuries, it changed dramatically. By the 1800s, Parliament had finally gutted that ancient document. Centuries of feudal rules about fish weirs, debts to Jews, and inheritance were scrapped in a statute law revision. In 1969, only 3 of those original clauses were left, and the Charter of Liberty was just reduced to essentially a museum piece. By the very Parliament that some people still think it restrains. So of those 3 clauses that remain, there's the freedom of the English Church, and that meant the Crown couldn't interfere with the running of the Church of England. We have the same today. Then ancient rights for merchants and bankers in a square mile of the City of London. They still have those rights today. A mayor, a police force, and you're not going to believe this, but some bloke that represents them sat in Parliament. And that line about imprisonment without lawful judgment remains. And I think this is where a lot of the conspiracy theory comes in, because some people want me to think, and they want you to think, that you can walk into a court, wave the Magna Carta, and the case collapses. They also talk about Clause 61, which supposedly gives the people the right to rebel against the government, except little detail. Remember, Clause 61 was deleted within a year of 1215. It has 0 legal standing today. And then they have no free man shall be imprisoned without judgment of his peers or the law of the land. And this is important because people are interpreting this, that being held in a cell before a trial is illegal under the Magna Carta, but actually they are incorrect. Because in reality, thousands of people in Britain sit on remand, waiting for their trial for months, sometimes years, perfectly legally. And it's legal because a judge signed the order to hold them on remand in a cell in the first place. That is how Magna Carta is interpreted in the law through the centuries right up to today. The detention is legal as long as it was signed. The protection of the Magna Carta sounds powerful, but in practice it offers no defence at all. And that's the problem. The Magna Carta sounds like a shield against tyranny, but in practice it really isn't. Parliament has the power and has had the power to overrule it, and they have again and again and again. It would never be accepted into defence. Stop sending it to me. It's sad, really, because I would love it to be true. Is it completely useless? No, of course it's not completely useless. The Magna Carta is a wonderful historical symbol. It was very important because it planted the seed that rulers weren't above the law, and it inspired later documents like Bill of Rights, the US Constitution. It is important, but it's crap practically today. Right, now we've established that it just can't help us. Let's remember, the real fight for freedom wasn't in 1215. That was never about the people. The real fight for freedom is now. Right, we've done history. Let's do science next.